Hey guys, Naz here. Today I thought I'd take you through my Mickey dyeing experience. Unfortunately, I couldn't actually record myself dyeing because mixing uh, butane stoves with noxious fumes and dye and water and such is not really something I wanted to have my expensive camera around, and also I was sort of experimenting as I was going. So I hope you guys are alright with me just going through this snapshot of all these pictures I took as I was dyeing the fabric. If you'd like to see me actually dye some fabric the next time that I'm doing some dyeing, let me know and I'll actually take a video. But yeah, it was just a safety issue and an issue of I can't just infinitely record while I was working, while I was trying to work things out myself. So it probably took me about 7 hours all up to dye all the Minky that I did. But it was definitely worth it, and it'll be a lot quicker next time because I'll know what I'm doing and I won't just be taking stabs in the dark trying to get the effects that I wanted. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to dye two colours. The first one, well, the character that I wanted to make is a Raichu, and to me none of the Minky colours available really match the orange in Raichu. You kind of have Mango, which is too yellow, and then you have Orange and Pumpkin, which are too saturated and too dark. So I sort of wanted this nice in-between medium orange, golden orange. And I also wanted to see if I could try to dye this colour in his ears and paws, which is kind of, again, a colour between grey and brown, so a taupe kind of colour, which doesn't really come in Shannon Minky, so I wanted to try and recreate that myself to get a pretty accurate colour match. So I'll start off by bringing up the pictures. These are the colours I ended up with. It's pretty hard to photograph the orange. The camera just sort of glares out and says everything's orange. It doesn't really show the variation that I got. You can see a bit better on the left hand side the variations of grey that I got. So this is silver, which is the colour I started out with, and you can see all these variations that have more of a brownish hue to them. It's hard to see here, but I started off with Mango for these orange tones that I got, so hopefully there'll be more pictures that'll show you the colours better. This is just another comparison of Shannon's silver and then just with a tiny bit of brown added to it. You can see it's such a nice warm colour compared to the cool icy silver that Shannon has. So anyway, I started off with buying myself a portable gas stove, so a camping stove or a butane stove. This one, they only had 2 burners available, so I just got that. It cost me $60 all up with 4 lots of the butane gas, and each gas bottle runs for about 90 minutes, which is great. So that was only $5 for the set, so yeah, $60 all up. It's just, you know, a little cheap thing used for camping, but a friend of mine she dyed Minky on the stove, and what neither of us realised is the condensation from dyeing the Minky can stain white walls, and it stained her roof unfortunately. So in my rental I definitely didn't want to have the same problem dyeing our roof orange, so I decided that with the toxic fumes and how easily the dye can pretty much dye anything because it's made to dye plastics, it's not the best thing to be using inside. So if you can afford one, I would highly recommend going out and buying one of these portable gas stoves to use outside. So this is it set up. I actually had to go out and buy a bigger pot. So one thing I would recommend is actually cut out the amount of Minky that you want to dye and place it in the pot that you intend to dye it in, because I had a much smaller pot and I thought that it would be big enough, but unfortunately it wasn't. So the morning I was going to dye, I realised that pot was too small, so I had to run out to I think it was Target or Kmart or something like that, and I bought this pot. It's about 30 centimetres wide and 30 centimetres high, and it's huge, so it was plenty big enough to do the dyeing that I wanted to do. So you can see here I've just set up on a little table outside. I've got my burner. I just got these utensils from a thrift shop. because you can never use any of these utensils or pots that you're dyeing in for food. So don't use, obviously don't use your family's cookware. Go out to a thrift shop or just go buy your own, and make sure that they're kept away from where anyone could use them for cooking, because this stuff is super toxic. So anyway, what I started off by doing is I wanted to see if it was better for me to dye orange from starting with white or starting with mango minky, which is like a yellowy orange. I also got out some swatches of the other, like this is mango, this is pumpkin, and this is orange Shannon minky. So those were the 3 oranges that are available. So I wanted to have those as a reference to sort of see, well, I don't want something as light as this, I don't want something as dark as this, I don't want something as saturated as this. So just have a little swatch set handy. So what I did, I just cut out probably 10 pieces, little chunks of minky and the mango and the white. And I put them in my sink and I soaked all of them. All the tutorials I've seen online for dyeing any fabric have recommended that you pre-soak them. So I just put cold water in the sink and got them all saturated. It definitely helps because with minky, sometimes it sort of repels the water. And you want to make sure that it's totally saturated so that when you do put it in the pot to dye it, it accepts that dye and that water straight away, so you're not messing around and having splotchy dye from areas not being wet already. Anyway, I just put my gloves on, filled the pot with hot water, and turned, obviously I set up the burner, the gas cylinder fits in here, turned on the little burner underneath and waited for the water to boil. And I waited and I waited and I waited. It took, even with starting off with hot water, it took probably 20 or 30 minutes for this much water to boil on such a flimsy little stove. So be aware that it's probably going to take a long time for your water to get up to boiling. I pretty much just went on my laptop, kept an eye on the stove obviously. But yeah, it did take a while for it to boil. Once it had boiled, I put in half my dye packet. So what I used is, you can see down here, it's called iDye Poly. So that's specially made for polyester fabrics like minky. So anyway, I got it to a boil, chucked half of the dye packet in. There's probably about 10 litres of water in here at this stage. And I just mixed it all through to make sure that all that powder had thoroughly dissolved before I put any fabric in there. And I also put down some plastic so that when I was taking my wet fabric out of the pot and putting it somewhere to dry or dunking it, I wasn't going to get dye all over the deck. So you can see I've just got some cold water in here, got my utensils. And what I did is I set up these 2 large plastic containers with cold water, just fresh cold water. And what that did is once my fabric had dyed, for the amount of time I wanted it to, chuck it straight into this cold water, swish it around, rinse all the excess dye off and lift it out of the water, and that shows you the true colours of your minky, what your minky is going to be dyed to. But keep in mind, because it's wet, it's going to be darker than when it's dry. So I also actually wet my swatches that I showed you before, that mango, pumpkin and orange. I wet them as well, so I could sort of have a reference of wet minky colours to sort of gauge the difference between them. So these are some of the tests that I did. I started off thinking that the dye wouldn't do very much and that it was quite weak, judging from other people's experiences. I made sure that my water was definitely at a boil, by the way. If your water is not very hot, it will take a long time for the dye to adhere to your fabric. So anyway, I put these in for, I think it was a minute. I think it was a minute. And anyway, I thought, oh, that's not going to dye it very much, but you can see that this has gone from this to this, which is like a blood orange, a very dark reddish orange. So that was way too extreme. Then I tried, I think these ones up here for 30 seconds, and it was still too dark. It was still kind of like this orange colour from Plush Addict, not Plush Addict, Shannon. So I wanted to get it far lighter than that, so then I went down to here, which was about 20 seconds for these, and I think this one was about 10 seconds. So I knew that if you start off with a paler colour closer to the colour you want to achieve, you definitely have to dye it less, which is of benefit to you because the less time your minky is in the boiling water, the less time it has to get damaged. So I really only needed to dye this mango minky in that solution for about 10 to 20 seconds to get the colour that I was after. So anyway, what I did was, when I was dyeing it, I don't have any pictures because obviously I had gloves on and I was handling boiling hot water and such. I pre-wet my fabric. After I had worked out obviously how long it would take to dye the fabric, I pre-wet it and got these long pincers. I would dunk it in the water, and the key is to constantly shake it up and agitate it. If you leave it in there and don't stir it, you're going to get patchy colouring. So absolutely mix the crap out of it, dunk it, splush it around, don't let it sit there. And I only dyed it for about 20 to 30 seconds for the results that I got. And also be careful with lifting your fabric out. I didn't realise how heavy the fabric would be because it was wet, and I got a nasty surprise using that flimsy little mixer, the spoon, the plastic spoon. I thought I could just lift it out with that, but the spoon almost snapped back and spluttered hot boiling water covered with dye all over me. Lucky it wasn't so hot that I got burnt, but yeah, I got it all over me. So make sure that you're using a really strong utensil and don't underestimate how heavy that wet fabric is. So use something decent and really pick it up, try and pick most of it up at once. Don't sort of pick a corner of it up because it'll probably just splash back down. Try and pick it up from the middle and pick up as much weight as you can when you're transferring it out of the pot and into your cold water baths to rinse it out and stop the dyeing process. That's another thing that the cold water does. So I dyed my fabric and I did multiple batches. When I was finished with a certain piece of minky, I would just chuck it in the cold water bath and leave it while I dyed the next piece. I dyed several pieces because I wanted to make full use of the dye bath that I'd made up, because it takes so long to set it up and to heat the water and everything, so I thought I may as well get a fair bit of orange out of this. Apparently you can also store the water with the dye in it in glass containers, but I didn't have any glass containers big enough to store 10 litres worth. So I thought, you know, I have half of the packet left, it doesn't really matter whether I store it or not. I tried dyeing a whole metre at once, and that didn't turn out so well. It was a tiny bit patchy. It wasn't super noticeable, but I could notice it just. I think that's because I couldn't agitate it as much. Because it's such a large piece of fabric, it was filling up the pot too much. So I ended up dyeing half a metre at a time, and that gave me a really even dyeing pattern, and yeah, that's what I ended up doing. So I finished dyeing all my pieces and I put them into my washing machine just for 15 minutes, cold water. Sorry, with a tiny little bit of detergent, it doesn't really matter too much. And then they came out like this, so you can see, I think this hasn't been dyed yet. Hey guys, Naz here again. For some reason I lost the file that contained the last part of this tutorial, so I'm recording this last section again. Carl's here with me, so if you hear any little chirpy cheeps, that's him putting in his experience, his wise experience with dyeing minky. So anyway, the last part that I talked about was up to the point where you would wash your minky in the washing machine. Now, I don't have a clothes dryer, so I just put it on my clothes rack and let it dry overnight, and it was dry the next day. You can see here are all the oranges that I achieved, and you can see that the nap, Carl, calm down. You can see the nap doesn't look too fantastic. It's definitely suffered because of the dyeing process. So anyway, I brought my big work table outside, and I thought that I could just brush the nap down like I've seen other people do with a fine-tooth comb. I don't know if those other people were using better quality combs. I was just using a cheap plastic one, but it took absolutely forever to brush the nap, and it didn't really yield the best results, so I wasn't quite happy with that. So you can see the quality that it went to after I'd brushed it. So those are just a couple of shades that I achieved. You can see one's a bit lighter and one's a bit darker. And you can also see the colour. I've taken this swatch and I blow dried it so I could see what it would look like dry. This is my orange compared to orange, pumpkin and mango. And here are just some other colours that I got while I was dyeing. This is just an example of a white swatch versus a mango swatch, and you can see that the mango swatch has a slightly yellow tint to it compared to the swatch that started off white. So those underneath colours, those starting colours definitely affect the final result. These are just some of the browns that I got. Dried swatches. And anyway, I didn't take photos of the process of actually properly fixing the nap, but I'll run you guys through what I did. So to start off with, I put my iron on the cotton setting, which is a medium to high setting, and I ironed the back of all the Minky so that the backing of the Minky was perfectly smooth. I didn't iron the front of it, obviously. Then what I did was I got my rough cat, what would you call it, cat hairbrush, cat slicker brush, which has metal prongs, fine metal prongs, and I used that instead of the comb, and it worked so much better. Calm down, Carl. Carl's excited to be in the video. I probably shouldn't have let him be in the video, but anyway, I just used that cat slicker brush to very aggressively brush downwards in the direction of the nap, and this definitely, as you can see in these final pictures, made a huge difference to the nap of the fabric. It got out all those nasty wrinkles and such that the dyeing process had left, so I would definitely recommend using a cat slicker brush if you've got one. And I also use it a lot for my general plushie making, brushing out seams, so it's a good investment. I think mine cost me $5 from Pet Shop. But anyway, you can see the final result. The Minky is perfectly smooth. The only bits that I couldn't save were the very tops of the fabric because I didn't have anywhere to grab onto to drag my cat hair slicker brush down to help the nap. Yes, Carl. You happy now? Anyway, the Minky is perfectly fine. It's just as smooth, just as soft as untreated Minky. So if you go through that process of ironing the back and as well as aggressively brushing the front, you might need to do it a few times if you know, depending on how picky you are. But anyway, that got it perfectly smooth, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you want me to if you'd like me to make a tutorial on a certain topic, please let me know. I hope this is helpful for you guys. If you have any questions about my dyeing process, just let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. This video is for my $5 plus patrons on Patreon. If you watch this video, please leave your subscription at $5 or more until payments are taken at the end of the month. Thanks for watching, and I hope this was helpful. See you guys.